I've always been the type of person to laugh in the face of superstition. Black cats, broken mirrors, walking under ladders, none of it ever fazed me. My grandmother, however, was the exact opposite. She was a firm believer in all things supernatural, often warning me about the dangers lurking just beyond our perception. One of her favorite superstitions was never to look into a mirror at midnight. She claimed that mirrors held the power to trap souls, and that gazing into one at the witching hour would invite spirits into our world. I moved into my grandmother's old house in New Orleans after she passed away. The house was a beautiful but eerie relic of the past, steeped in history and shadowed by age-old tales of hauntings and ghostly apparitions. Tall, arched windows framed by heavy drapes, creaky wooden floors, and chandeliers that cast flickering shadows all contributed to the house's unsettling charm. Despite its unsettling atmosphere, I found myself drawn to its enigmatic allure. It was during one of those late-night musings that my grandmother's old warnings came back to me. Her tales of supernatural horrors seemed almost laughable now. After all, I'd spent countless nights alone in this house, and nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened. So, in a moment of defiant curiosity, I decided to test her most persistent superstition. I stood in front of the ornate mirror in the hallway, its frame gilded and weathered with time. The clock struck midnight, and I took a deep breath, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the house's drafty halls. I stared into the mirror, expecting nothing more than my own reflection to stare back. But what I saw was far from my own face. It was the image of a woman, her eyes hollow and filled with a sorrow that seemed to span centuries. Her presence was so tangible, so real, that I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her gaze, a gaze that seemed to pierce through the veil of time itself. And in that moment, I knew that my grandmother's warnings were more than just the ramblings of an old woman. They were a dire prediction of the horror that was about to unfold in my life. Ever since I saw her in the mirror, my mind has been a storm of disbelief and fear. My grandmother's superstitions, which I had once dismissed so easily, now seemed to hold a weight that I couldn't ignore. But a part of me still clung to skepticism. Could it have been a trick of the light? My imagination running wild in the eerie atmosphere of this old house? Determined to find a rational explanation, I resolved to confront the mirror again. The hours leading up to midnight were filled with a nervous energy. I tried to busy myself with tasks around the house, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that ghostly reflection. The house felt different now, its shadows deeper and more menacing. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains seemed to whisper warnings in the still air. As the clock inched closer to midnight, I found myself drawn to the hallway where the mirror stood. The old grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, each second echoing my growing apprehension. I stood in front of the mirror, its surface gleaming dully in the dim light. I could feel my heartbeat quicken, a cold sweat forming on my brow. What was I hoping to find? Validation that it was all in my head, or confirmation of something far more sinister? Finally, the moment arrived. The clock struck midnight, each chime reverberating through the house like a tolling bell. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever might come. With a mix of dread and determination, I lifted my eyes to the mirror. At first, all I saw was my own reflection, pale and tense. But as the seconds ticked by, my reflection seemed to waver, like ripples on the surface of a pond. Then, slowly, her image began to materialize. The woman from before, her eyes empty and sorrowful, staring back at me. This time, I couldn't blame it on a fleeting illusion. She was there, as real as the fear that now gripped my heart. I tried to move, to turn away, but I was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by her gaze. Her mouth opened, and though no sound came out, I could feel her words, a cold whisper that chilled me to the bone. "Help me," she seemed to say, her voice a silent plea that echoed in my mind. The air around me grew thick, oppressive, as if the house itself were closing in on me. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in that horrifying tableau. Could have been seconds or hours. All I knew was that when I finally broke free of her gaze, I was gasping for breath, my heart pounding like a drum. I stumbled back, nearly falling, and tore my eyes away from the mirror. But the image of her face remained burned into my mind, a haunting reminder that I had crossed a line I didn't fully understand. In that moment, the gravity of what I had done hit me with full force. I had defied a warning older than I could comprehend, and now I was paying the price. The curse had been cast, and there was no turning back. The moment her reflection replaced mine, time seemed to freeze. The woman's face was pale, almost translucent, framed by long, dark hair that cascaded around her shoulders. Her eyes were empty voids, black and bottomless, and yet they held a depth of sorrow that felt centuries old. She wore a dress that looked like it belonged to another era, its intricate lace and high collar hinting at a time long past. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at her, unable to move. The room around me faded away, and all I could see was her face in the mirror. Her lips moved, forming words that I couldn't hear, but their meaning seeped into my mind like an icy whisper. "Help me," she seemed to say, her silent plea echoing in the depths of my consciousness. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, my skin prickling with fear. This wasn't just a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. She was real, and she was trapped somehow, reaching out to me from the other side. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a frantic drum that echoed in the silence of the house. In the dim light of the hallway, her form began to shimmer and waver, like a candle flame flickering in the wind. I wanted to look away, to turn and run, but I was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by her sorrowful gaze. Her eyes seemed to bore into mine, as if she could see straight into my soul. As I stood there, paralyzed by fear, fragments of a story began to form in my mind. I remembered my grandmother mentioning a woman who had lived in this house a century ago. She had been a young bride, full of hope and dreams, but her life had ended in tragedy. Her husband had gone mad with jealousy, accusing her of infidelity and locking her away in the attic. She had died there, alone and forgotten, her spirit lingering in the house ever since. Now it seemed she had found a way to make herself known, and in doing so, she had cast a curse upon me, drawing me into her world of pain and sorrow. The realization hit me like a cold wave, leaving me breathless and trembling. This wasn't just a ghost story, it was my reality. The fear that gripped me was like nothing I had ever experienced before. It was a primal, bone-deep terror that made my legs weak and my mind race. I could feel the weight of her curse pressing down on me, a heavy, suffocating presence that I couldn't escape. Desperation clawed at my chest as I struggled to understand what was happening, to find a way to break free from her grasp. With a supreme effort, I tore my gaze away from the mirror and stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house seemed to close in around me, its shadows deepening and its air growing colder. I knew then that I was no longer alone in this house. Her spirit was here, and it had marked me as its own. As I fled down the hallway, her image remained burned into my mind, a haunting reminder of the curse that now bound me. I had unleashed something ancient and malevolent, and I had no idea how to stop it. The days that followed were a descent into madness. The woman's reflection haunted me, her sorrowful eyes staring back at me every time I closed mine. I knew I had been cursed, but understanding that didn't make it any easier to bear. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. It started with small, unsettling events. Objects would move on their own, shifting position when I wasn't looking. I'd leave a book on the coffee table, only to find it later on the kitchen counter. Doors that I was sure I'd closed would be wide open when I returned to the room. At night, I heard whispers, soft and indistinct, as if carried on the wind. They seemed to be calling my name, urging me to look in the mirror again, but I resisted, too afraid of what I might see. Sleep became a distant memory. Every time I drifted off, I was plagued by nightmares. I saw the woman, trapped and weeping, begging for my help. I saw myself, lost in a maze of mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of my fate. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, the shadows in my room seeming to pulse with a life of their own. As the days passed, the disturbances grew more violent. The temperature in the house would plummet without warning, my breath fogging in the air. I'd feel sudden, sharp pains, like icy fingers gripping my flesh. Once, I woke to find scratches on my arms, as if something had tried to claw its way inside me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with a constant hum of dread. Desperation set in. I needed to understand what was happening, to find a way to break the curse before it consumed me entirely. I started by researching the history of the house and the woman who had lived here a century ago. Her name was Eleanor, and her story was even more tragic than I had imagined. She had been falsely accused of infidelity by her jealous husband, who had locked her in the attic. Driven mad by isolation and despair, she had taken her own life. Her spirit had lingered in the house, bound by her anguish and need for justice. I searched for any mention of her curse, scouring old records and local legends. I found fragments of stories, hints of a dark ritual that might break the bond between our worlds. But the details were maddeningly vague, shrouded in layers of myth and superstition. I needed something concrete, something that could give me hope. One night, as I pored over yet another dusty tome, I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, dread coiling in my stomach, and saw Eleanor's reflection in the window. She was closer this time, her eyes filled with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Her mouth moved, and this time, I could hear her voice, faint and hollow. "Find the mirror," she whispered. "Break the curse." Her words sent a shiver through me. What mirror? I thought frantically. The one in the hallway. Or was there another, hidden somewhere in the house? I tore through the rooms, searching for any clue, any hidden space where a mirror might be concealed. I felt like a man possessed, driven by a need I couldn't fully understand. Finally, in the attic, I found it. An old, ornate mirror, covered in dust and cobwebs. It was hidden behind a pile of old furniture, forgotten by time. As I uncovered it, a sense of dread and anticipation filled me. This was it. This was the source of the curse. I stared at my reflection, half expecting to see Eleanor's face instead of my own. But it was just me, exhausted and terrified, a man on the brink of losing everything. I knew what I had to do. I had to destroy the mirror to shatter the link between our worlds. With trembling hands, I picked up a heavy candlestick and raised it above my head. For a moment, I hesitated, fear and doubt clouding my mind. What if this didn't work? What if it made things worse? But I had no other choice. I brought the candlestick down with all my strength, smashing the mirror into 1,000 shards. As the glass shattered, a scream filled the air, a sound of pure agony and release. The room seemed to shake, the very walls vibrating with the force of Eleanor's anguish. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. The air grew still, the oppressive weight lifted, and I was left standing amidst the shards of the broken mirror, my heart pounding in the silence. Breaking the mirror didn't end the curse. It only intensified it. The days that followed were filled with a frantic urgency. I delved deeper into Eleanor's history, seeking any piece of information that could help me understand what I was truly dealing with. I scoured old newspapers, combed through public records, and even consulted with local historians who specialized in New Orleans' dark past. Eleanor's life was laid bare before me, a tragic tale of love, betrayal, and madness. She had been a beautiful, vibrant young woman, full of life and dreams, until her husband's jealousy turned their love into a prison. The details of her death were gruesome. She had been found hanging from the rafters of the attic, a broken doll discarded by the world. Her spirit had lingered, bound by the injustice of her untimely demise and the lies that had sealed her fate. As I pieced together her story, I realized that the curse was more than just a haunting. It was a cry for justice, a desperate plea for someone to acknowledge her suffering and set her free. But how? The answer came to me in fragments, hints, and whispers from the past. I needed to confront her directly, to show her that I understood her pain and was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to release her from her torment. The night of the final confrontation arrived. I prepared myself as best I could, arming myself with knowledge and a resolve forged in fear and determination. I went back to the attic, the place where Eleanor's life had ended and her curse had begun. The air was thick with a palpable tension, as if the house itself were holding its breath. I stood in front of the shattered mirror, the broken shards reflecting countless fractured images of myself. "Eleanor," I called out, my voice trembling, "I'm here to help you. I know your pain. I understand your suffering. Please, show yourself." The temperature in the room plummeted, my breath forming clouds in the icy air. The shadows deepened, and then she was there, her form materializing out of the darkness. Her eyes were the same as before, hollow and sorrowful, but there was a flicker of something else. Hope, perhaps. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice a ghostly whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Because I didn't believe," I replied, my voice breaking. "I thought it was all just stories, but now I see the truth. You were wronged, and your spirit has been trapped here, suffering for a century. I'm here to make it right." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the woman she had once been. "To break the curse," she said slowly, "you must take my place. You must become the guardian of this house, the keeper of its secrets." The weight of her words settled on me like a shroud. I understood what she was asking. To free her, I had to bind myself to the house, to become its new protector. It was a sacrifice that demanded everything, but I knew it was the only way. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady with resolve. "I'll take your place, Eleanor. You deserve to be free." She reached out a hand, her fingers cold as ice, and touched my cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have given me the greatest gift." As her form began to fade, a warmth spread through me, a sense of peace that I had not felt since this nightmare began. The oppressive weight lifted, the shadows receded, and I knew that Eleanor's spirit was finally at rest. But my fate was now sealed. I felt the house's presence envelop me, its ancient secrets whispering in my mind. I had become the guardian, the keeper of its haunted past. My life was no longer my own, bound to the house and the echoes of its history. The days turned into weeks, and I found myself settling into my new role. The strange occurrences ceased, the whispers quieted, and the house seemed almost serene. Yet, I knew that I could never leave. My sacrifice had freed Eleanor, but it had also imprisoned me. People would come and go, visiting the old house, unaware of the guardian who watched over them. And sometimes, late at night, I'd look into the mirror and see a reflection that wasn't my own. Eleanor's eyes would meet mine, filled with gratitude and peace, and I knew that I had done the right thing. My fate remained ambiguous, my life intertwined with the house's dark past. But in my heart, I carried the knowledge that I had brought justice to a tortured soul and found a strange kind of redemption in the process. Enjoyed it? Give a like and spread the terror. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any scares. Join our dark community.